Late at night, Daniel suddenly noticed something strange on the monitor in his son's room. He rushed over to check, and upon seeing his son's sleeping figure, he let out a sigh of relief. He thought he was just being overly sensitive until he woke his son.
What's wrong, Daddy?
At first, Daniel assumed it had all been a nightmare, but when he reviewed the monitor footage, he saw a truly chilling sight, a ghostly shadow standing simultaneously at the foot of each family member's bed. In reality, the strange events plaguing this family were far from over. It started with Daniel's wife, Lacey, waking up in the middle of the night and noticing signs of intrusion in the kitchen. Not only were food items scattered across the floor, but the back door was left open. However, since all the meat was untouched except for a few vegetables, they didn't think much of it and assumed it must have been small animals like rabbits. That night, Lacey was startled awake by an eerie, rumbling noise. She followed the sound back to the kitchen and witnessed something even more bizarre. The kitchen items had been stacked into a massive structure resembling toy blocks, forming a mysterious star-like pattern when illuminated by the light. Even stranger, there were no signs that any doors or windows had been opened. The next day, Lacey immediately called the police, but after hearing that nothing valuable was stolen except for some insignificant food, the police dismissed it as childish pranks. Just to be safe, Daniel, recently unemployed and already burdened with financial stress, reactivated the house alarm system. That very night, the ear-piercing alarm jolted them awake. They rushed downstairs only to find all the doors and windows locked and no trace of an intruder. The security company called shortly after, reporting that all 8 entry points in the house had been triggered simultaneously, yet with no evidence of life detected. They dismissed it as a system malfunction. As Daniel hung up the phone, he noticed Lacey staring intently at the TV cabinet, her face filled with disbelief. The photos that once decorated the cabinet were now just empty frames. This inexplicable scene sent chills down their spines. With no other choice, they called the police again, but the officers stubbornly insisted it was all a prank by their children, lecturing Daniel on the importance of disciplining kids who lie. The security company also confirmed that the alarm system was functioning perfectly, though they couldn't explain why it had gone off. That evening, the couple decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with their sons. Jesse, the older brother, remained indifferent, but when they turned to their younger son, Sammy, Lacey suddenly remembered something.
Sam, did you have that dream again? About the Sandman? Did the Sandman take the photos? It's okay, you can tell us.
I can't.
What do you mean you can't?
He told me not to say.
After listening to Sammy, Daniel began frantically searching his room. At that moment, he believed what the police said was true. Life's pressures and his son's rebellious lies had finally pushed him over the edge. He thought the series of bizarre events was over, but little did he know it was only just beginning. The next day, while tidying up Sammy's room, Lacey stumbled upon a strange drawing. As she stared at it in confusion, a sudden thud drew her attention to the window, where she saw a bird crash straight into the glass. She was about to investigate when health officials quickly arrived. They suspected the birds might have contracted an unknown disease, though further testing was needed. Before leaving, they reassured the family not to worry and promised to notify them of any results. That night, Lacey was once again awakened by the rumbling noise. She hurried downstairs to check, and finding everything in order, she began to relax. But as she turned to leave, she heard faint whispers coming from Sammy's room. Curious, she walked in and screamed in terror. Daniel ran to her side, but in just a blink, both Sammy and the ghostly shadow had vanished. Frantic, the couple searched the house, and when Daniel turned, he saw his son standing outside the door. He rushed to stop Sammy, who seemed to awaken from a sleepwalking trance.
Why are we outside?
Afterward, Lacey told Daniel about the shadow, but Daniel refused to believe her, dismissing it as a hallucination brought on by stress. Before bed, Daniel felt an itch behind his ear, and upon checking, he saw what seemed to be an insect bite. He brushed it off and went to sleep. The next evening, Daniel installed surveillance cameras in every room to pinpoint the source of these strange occurrences. That night passed uneventfully, but upon reviewing the footage, Daniel noticed a brief signal disruption on each camera at around the same time. Meanwhile, unaware of this discovery, Lacey went about her day as usual. showing houses to potential buyers. Everything was going smoothly until, just as the client showed interest, Lacey found herself unable to speak. Her body froze, no longer under her control.
Lacey?
When she awoke, she thought it had been a nightmare, but the smudged makeup on her face and a mysterious scar on her forehead told her otherwise. Her phone rang. Her boss demanded to know why she had missed work and accused her of acting like a lunatic, banging against the glass while showing the house earlier that day. Shocked, Lacey realized it was already 3 p.m. Before she could process what had happened, the health department called with the bird incident results. The birds had no signs of disease and, disturbingly, belonged to 3 different migrating flocks from entirely separate directions, so they couldn't determine why the birds were behaving this way, only speculating that something in the house seemed to be attracting them. As things grew more and more bizarre, Lacey turned to the internet for answers. To her surprise, she actually found a clue. It turned out that her family wasn't alone. Many others had experienced similar strange events, and all of them pointed to one thing: the legend of extraterrestrial beings. Before she could tell Daniel, he started exhibiting the same strange behavior as Sammy. Late at night, Daniel stood outside the door, unresponsive, as blood dripped from his nose. When he regained awareness in the kitchen, he remembered nothing. The next day, things escalated further. While playing in the woods, Jesse and his friends were overwhelmed by a strange rumbling sound that sent him into a panic. At the hospital, doctors found nothing physically wrong with Jesse, though his body bore strange marks that resembled the mysterious star-like pattern. Back home, their neighbor returned Sammy after noticing dark bruises on his body during a swim. Following the clues they found online, and desperate for answers, they sought out an expert specializing in such phenomena. Initially, they approached it with a nothing-to-lose mindset, but after hearing their story, the expert immediately understood what was happening. After hearing their story, the expert revealed the truth. They were being targeted by the Greys, aliens who abduct humans for study. The expert told them that they had been targeted by a type of extraterrestrial beings known as the Greys, whose sole purpose was to study humans. These beings would begin by causing fear through pranks and disturbances. Before abducting the first child they came into contact with, families chosen by the Greys had no way of escaping their fate. To support his claim, the expert revealed his room filled with countless files on missing children, grim evidence of what he was describing. The red rash behind Daniel's ear wasn't an insect bite. It was a tracking implant placed by the Greys. The expert had one, too. He had tried every possible method to remove it, but it was embedded deep into the bone, far beyond the reach of human medical technology.
People think of aliens as these beings invading our planet in some great cataclysm, destroying monuments, stealing our natural resources. But it's not like that at all. The invasion already happened. No one knows exactly when, but they're here.
At this point, the expert told them that their only option was to accept their fate and cherish the time they had left with their children. But Daniel and Lacey refused to give up. Determined to protect their family, Daniel bought the most powerful close-range shotgun he could find, while Lacey brought home the fiercest guard dog from the pet store. They then sealed all the doors and windows in the house and sternly instructed Jesse to watch over his brother, Sammy. In their minds, the Greys had already chosen Sammy as their target. Once everything was ready, the 4 of them sat together at the dining table, savoring one last moment of peace. But the nightmare came all too soon. The house lights and TV began to flicker uncontrollably, and the new guard dog started barking furiously at the front door. Daniel immediately told Lacey to take the children upstairs while he stayed to guard the door. Lacey didn't hesitate. She rushed the boys upstairs, locked them in a room, and told them to bolt the door. No matter what sounds they heard, they must not open it. Lacey armed herself with a knife and stood watch outside. At that moment, the entire house went dark. A blinding white light suddenly flashed outside, and an eerie silence fell over everything. Lacey was then drawn to a strange noise in the next room. She approached slowly, unaware that danger was already behind her. Downstairs, Daniel stood his ground as he watched in horror. The screws on the front door were being ripped out by some invisible force. Gritting his teeth against the terror, he fired his shotgun just as the door burst open. Meanwhile, The children trembled in their room as the door shook violently, and flashes of white light seeped through the cracks. In the nick of time, Daniel arrived and pulled them to safety. He then broke down the door where Lacey was trapped, and the family huddled together tightly. It felt like an eternity, or perhaps just a moment, when they looked up and saw the Greys standing right in front of them. Without warning, the next thing Jesse knew, he woke up alone in his bed, seeing his brother Sammy running out of the room. He instinctively followed him downstairs, but there, he found himself trapped in a terrifying vision. In this horrifying hallucination, Jesse witnessed his father shooting his mother before turning the gun on himself. Grief-stricken, Jesse saw Sammy's silhouette appear before him. Remembering his parents' instructions, he moved toward his brother step by step, but just as he reached out to touch Sammy, no one could have expected it. The one who was taken was the older brother, Jesse. It wasn't until 3 months later, as they were packing to move, that they discovered the truth hidden among Jesse's old belongings. His childhood drawings had already shown traces of the Greys. Lacey suddenly remembered that when Jesse was a baby, he had suffered from a rare, incurable illness, yet miraculously recovered without explanation. It was at that moment she realized that the Greys had chosen him as their subject of observation. The realization shattered her, but the story didn't end there. As they sorted through a box of toys, a radio crackled to life. Sammy, curious, picked up a walkie-talkie and instinctively called out for his brother, just as he always had. To Lacey's shock, Jesse's desperate voice came through the speaker, crying for help.